Hey, lovelies. Do you sometimes find yourself feeling like people push stuff on you and you find yourself being exhausted because it seems like you constantly do things for everybody else? Then this is the video for you. Today I'm going to talk about how to set boundaries without feeling selfish. I'm Jessie Christian. I'm one of the admins here in the self love community, and I'm a life coach and help women fall in love with who they are. So, if we talk about boundaries, it's very important that we first establish what boundaries are. So, many people misunderstand boundaries. We're thinking that they are essential needs or they are somehow logical or reasonable. But boundaries are what you want. So, in a sense, some people might have a boundary that they say, no one is allowed to smoke in my house. And some might find that reasonable, some might find that irreasonable, but that's not the question. A boundary is something that you want, something that you are setting. So that's very important because oftentimes when we are setting boundaries, we're unclear um, about like the logic behind it or the rationale behind it, but that's not the topic of discussion. You decide what a boundary is for you. Um, and setting boundaries is a three-step process. So we're going to start with the first one. Bear with me on my handwriting. And that's creating a boundary. So if you are creating a boundary, you are within yourself thinking about what is it that I am no longer available for. So what is it that I no longer want in my life? And as an example, you might have a friend who's very pushy, and she might be calling you many times in the evening, asking you for help, but you feel like you never get something back. Real life example. And maybe you want to create a boundary that says, I'm only available for this friend 2 times per week, or I am only available for this friend when I have some extra energy. In this case, the clearer the boundary, the easier to maintain. So I would recommend to go with a boundary that says like this many times per week or this many hours, but it's your decision what feels good to you. Once we have created the boundary, so we know what we want the boundary to be, we have to state the boundary. So that means the person who is involved in this boundary needs to know that this is now your boundary. So going back to the example with my friend who used to call me all the time, I would have to state with her, hey, from now on, I am only available for you 2 times per week. During the other time, I have other things going on. And this is a process where many of us struggle as well because we are a bit afraid of the reaction. We're going to go a bit deeper into that in a second. But first comes the third step of setting a boundary. And here you go. That is maintaining the boundary. So once we have stated it, the person knows it. Of course, because this is a new boundary, they will want to break that boundary. So they will try again and again, push you a little bit so you go back on your boundary. So what you have to do is maintain that boundary. And that also means that you follow through on things that you said. So if you're like, I only meet you 2 times per week, then you have to follow through on that you do only meet 2 times per week. Yeah, so these are the 3 steps of boundary setting. Seems quite easy, but my clients usually struggle with some step along the way. And today we want to go into a certain issue that many of my clients have, and that is feeling selfish. Feeling selfish when we are setting a boundary. So why do we feel selfish? First of all, women are often raised to take care of others, and this might be, depending on where you're from, the society you're from, You might be an oldest child, a middle child. You might have had to take care of your parents. There might be some reasons for you in the past that you often took care of others' needs before taking care of yours. So when we struggle and when we feel like we're being selfish, it often means that we never learned what it is that we want, what are our needs, and where is our boundary. So we might struggle already here with knowing what is our boundary. And if you want to move on from feeling less selfish when you're setting boundaries, it is very important to remember what I said in the beginning. Like, a boundary is not something that is here to be discussed. It's not something that needs to be defended, because it is your boundary and you are allowed to set whatever boundary you find reasonable, and that supports your needs and wants. If you want to in the beginning and you're setting a new boundary, like me with my friend, okay, I'm only available twice per week, you might want to say, oh, I'm choosing to do this now because I need a little bit more time for myself. The other part of feeling less selfish is understanding that it will take time for the other person. So honor the other person's process. That means that if you're setting this new boundary, the other person might come and say, like, oh, I feel so shitty that you don't have time for me anymore, or this wasn't an issue before, why is it now? That's all part of the process, and it's okay that it might feel a bit hard for that person in the beginning. That's why it's so important to maintain your boundary. And most importantly, I think when we're thinking about how to feel less selfish, is understanding that another person's emotional reaction to what you are setting as a boundary is not your responsibility. So one thing that I did when I was establishing this new boundary with my friend is I had to remind myself time and time again, I'm not responsible for her emotions and her reaction. I'm not responsible for your feelings. Every person is responsible of their own feelings and their own reaction. It's not your job to soothe somebody else unless it's your child. That's a very different situation. But if we're thinking about like two adults, it's not your job to soothe somebody else. It's their job to find appropriate measures to feel okay with this. And that really helped me because this friend that I had, she was very toxic. So she would often try to talk me out of setting that boundaries. So she would say, like, hey, but if you organize your day like this, then you will have time for me. But it's not up to discussion. Like, this is my boundary. I don't have to discuss it. I don't have to defend it. And if her reaction is like, for instance, she might feel I'm having not enough time for her, or she might feel sad about it, then that's her reaction, and that's okay. But it's not my responsibility to be there for her reaction. And that was a huge mindset shift for me, in just realizing that I'm not responsible. This is not my job. And especially if you are grown up as a form of caretaker, if you felt responsibility for others most of your life, this is a huge change to remind yourself you are not responsible for how the person reacts. Because we are feeling selfish, because we're feeling blamed, we're feeling guilt, we're feeling shame. Yeah, so to sum up again, if you want to set boundaries without feeling selfish, remind yourself there's a 3-step process to setting boundaries. You are creating it, you're stating it, and you're maintaining them. And remind yourself that it will take some time for others to accept new boundaries, and it will take some time for you to maintain it as well. Be compassionate with yourself if it takes a bit, and remind yourself it's not your responsibility and it's not your like, other person's feelings and reactions are not your responsibility. Yeah, so I would love to hear what kind of questions come up for you with that. How could we further support you with this topic? So yeah, let me know in the comments, and I'm very excited to hear how this resonates with you. Okay, lovelies. Um, have a beautiful week.